The airport buzzed with its usual rhythm, metallic clinks of rolling suitcases, low murmurs of overhead announcements, hurried footsteps echoing off sleek tile floors. But Celeste Monroe moved through it all like a symphony in slow motion, poised and unshaken. She wore a charcoal gray suit tailored to perfection, its clean lines complementing her tall frame, and her natural curls were gathered into a soft twist at the nape of her neck. Gold studs gleamed subtly against her dark skin, and the only accessory she carried was a black leather satchel, its contents organized with the kind of precision that came from years of global business travel. She had flown more miles than she could count, negotiated mergers across continents, and stood her ground in boardrooms where her presence was doubted before she ever opened her mouth. Yet as she approached the VIP lounge, its frosted glass doors gleaming with the airline's golden crest, none of that seemed to matter. The woman at the desk, whose name tag read Heather, barely glanced up before her eyes flickered back down, lingering too long on Celeste's skin, her face betraying the momentary lapse of professionalism. "Can I help you?" Heather asked, the smile on her lips practiced but shallow. "Yes, good morning," Celeste replied, her tone warm but dignified. "I'm here to check in for the lounge." She slid her first-class ticket across the desk with the same calm certainty she brought to signing executive contracts. Heather accepted the ticket with a slow nod, her eyes narrowing just slightly. "May I see your ID?" she asked, though there was no hint of that request in the interaction with the man ahead of her in line, a man in cargo shorts and sandals whom she had just waved through without a glance. Celeste complied, handing over her license without flinching, though a quiet flicker of something settled in her chest. She had seen this play before. Heather inspected the ID longer than necessary, flipping it back and forth as if expecting it to reveal something damning. "I'm sorry," she said finally, placing the documents back on the counter with an air of forced regret. "This lounge is reserved for VIP members and qualifying first-class passengers." Celeste tilted her head, a single eyebrow arching. "I am a first-class passenger," she said evenly, pointing to the clearly printed words on her ticket. "So I'm asking what the issue is exactly." Heather didn't answer right away. Her eyes darted toward the growing line behind Celeste, then back to her as if calculating her next move. "We just don't normally see passengers like—" She stopped, clearing her throat. "It's unusual, that's all." There it was, the stammering hesitation, the crack in the polished mask. Celeste recognized it like the faint scent of rot beneath fresh flowers. She felt the heat rise behind her breastbone, not from shame, but from the weary ache of being told once again, in 1,000 different ways, "You don't belong here." Before she could speak again, the doors to the lounge slid open and a white couple walked out laughing. The man wore a wrinkled button-down, and the woman's mascara was smudged under her sunglasses. But Heather's demeanor changed in an instant. "Mr. and Mrs. Cartwright, welcome back," she gushed, her voice syrupy and sweet. Not once did she ask for their ID or ticket. The doors closed behind them with a soft shh, sealing Celeste once again on the wrong side of inclusion. She turned back to Heather, whose professional smile had returned like nothing had happened. "As I said," she said with a cool finality, "I'm afraid I can't allow you in." For a moment, Celeste stood frozen, not from indecision, but from the crushing weight of familiarity. She wasn't surprised, not anymore, but she was tired. Tired of the 1,000 paper cuts, the sideways glances, the tight smiles that never reached the eyes. Tired of being judged not for her credentials, but for the hue of her skin and the quiet pride in her voice. She took a slow breath, letting it wash over her like a wave smoothing stone. With the same grace she had cultivated through years of being second-guessed, she picked up her ID and ticket and tucked them neatly into her satchel. "I understand," she said, her voice calm but flat. Heather's smugness flickered just slightly at the lack of reaction. Celeste turned, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor as she walked away. Behind her, she could still hear the distant echo of the receptionist's light laughter, but it no longer had power over her. She found a quiet bench near the panoramic windows, far from the clamor of the gates. Outside, a plane taxied slowly toward the runway, its wings glinting in the morning light. Celeste sat still, letting the ache of the moment settle. Not to wallow in it, but to remember. She had faced worse. She had built her life on grace under pressure, on knowing her worth even when the world refused to see it. And now, once again, she had been asked to shrink, to apologize for standing where she had earned the right to be. But this time, Celeste wasn't going to simply walk away, not in silence. She reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and with a calmness that belied the fire within, pressed a single name in her favorites list. "It's me," she said when the line picked up. "Move forward. I want the paperwork signed today, within the hour." Her voice never rose. There was no fury in it, only precision, purpose, power. As she ended the call and slid the phone back into her bag, she looked once more at the frosted doors of the lounge. The woman behind them had made a mistake, one Celeste intended to make unforgettable. Celeste sat still on the edge of the quiet bench, her body motionless but her mind ablaze, the humiliation still fresh, curling beneath her skin like smoke. The memory of Heather's voice, sharp, patronizing, disbelieving, echoed in her ears, each syllable laced with the same ancient undertones that had followed her all her life. "You don't belong here. You're not one of us." But Celeste Monroe had spent decades turning those unspoken barbs into stepping stones. Her heart beat steadily in her chest, not out of fear or shame, but from the quiet tension that came before the shift of tectonic plates, the pause before the quake. She didn't cry. She didn't storm back through those frosted doors demanding apologies or calling for supervisors who would only echo the same tired excuse. It was just a misunderstanding. No, Celeste did none of that. Instead, she reached slowly for her phone, the weight of its cool glass grounding her, and tapped the single name she reserved for moments that required precision, speed, and absolute discretion. The line rang once, then again, then, "Miss Monroe," a crisp voice answered. "I take it the meeting didn't go well?" Celeste's lips curved into a tight smile. "It went exactly as expected, Elliot," she said evenly, her voice low but firm. "And that's the problem. I want the deal closed today." There was a pause on the other end, just long enough for the gravity of her words to register. "Today," Elliot repeated, his voice tightening with urgency. "Understood. We're already through due diligence. Just need the final sign-off. I'll mobilize the board." "No leaks," Celeste added. "I don't want so much as a whisper until the ink is dry. After that," she exhaled slowly, her gaze drifting back toward the lounge doors, behind which laughter still floated like smoke from a fire she intended to extinguish. "After that, I'll handle it personally." "As you wish," Elliot said. "You'll have confirmation within the hour." She ended the call without ceremony, lowering the phone gently into her lap. Around her, the airport continued on. Boarding calls chimed, footsteps shuffled, suitcases rolled by. But Celeste sat untouched, like the eye of a storm about to shift its center. The injustice she'd just endured wasn't new. It was just fresh. It carried the same bruising sting as all the others. The bank manager who assumed she was the assistant, not the executive. The waiter who brought the check to her white colleague, despite her name being on the reservation. But unlike those moments, this one came at precisely the wrong time for the people who delivered it, because Celeste was no longer building power. She had it, quietly, strategically, and completely. The acquisition she had been negotiating for 6 months, the one that would give her controlling interest in the very airline whose lounge she had just been denied access to, that deal was now racing toward a close, accelerated not by spite, but by purpose. Because Celeste didn't want revenge. She wanted reckoning. She wanted change. And she knew that real power did not scream. It moved silently until it didn't. Until it stood in front of you, calm and unapologetic, and made you face what you tried to ignore. She leaned back against the bench, closing her eyes for a moment, letting the rhythm of the airport wash over her like a cleansing tide. It wasn't just about Heather, it never was. It was about all the people who had been turned away quietly, told through tone and timing and tight-lipped smiles that they didn't look like they belonged. Celeste had the means to change that now. And more than the means, she had the will. When she opened her eyes, she didn't look shaken. She looked sharpened. Just then her phone buzzed again, vibrating against her thigh. A message from Elliot. Signed, all approvals in. You're the majority shareholder as of 9:42 a.m. The airline is yours. Celeste stared at the words for a moment, letting them settle in her chest like gravity. Then she smiled, not wide, not gleeful, but with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who had waited her entire life for the opportunity to be the change and now held it in her hands. But the most powerful thing she did next was nothing loud. She didn't leap from the bench or run back to the lounge to deliver her triumph. Instead, she stood up slowly, adjusted the hem of her blazer, and gathered her bag. Because this wasn't about theatrics. It was about transformation. Every step she took back toward the lounge was deliberate, her heels clicking against the marble like a gavel marking time. She wasn't coming back as the woman they tried to belittle. She was coming back as the woman who now owned the very walls that rejected her. And in that moment, with the quiet hum of the terminal behind her and the full weight of ownership under her control, Celeste wasn't just walking toward confrontation. She was walking toward legacy. Because this story wasn't going to end with her being turned away. This story was just beginning. And if you've followed her journey this far, if you've ever been dismissed, doubted, or disrespected, you'll want to hear what happens when Celeste opens those lounge doors again. When she reveals the truth, when justice is no longer asked for, but delivered with poise, policy, and power. So stay with us, because what comes next isn't just a reckoning. It's a revolution. By the time Celeste returned to the VIP lounge, the late afternoon sun had shifted, casting golden beams through the tall windows and staining the polished airport floor in soft amber. But Celeste's steps were anything but soft. Each click of her heels echoed like a metronome of inevitability. Slow, deliberate, and certain. She had just come from Terminal B, where she'd taken an unscheduled detour after receiving a voicemail that stopped her mid-stride. The message was from her sister Camille, quiet and breathless, her voice trembling with emotion. Celeste, I didn't want to bother you, but I had to tell you. Mom collapsed at the store this morning. She's stable, but they're keeping her overnight. Stress, they think. The doctor said she's been pushing too hard, and I just thought you'd want to know. Celeste had stood frozen, the message still playing in her ears, her hand tightening around her phone as her vision blurred. Their mother, the same woman who worked 2 jobs to send her daughters to college, who once walked miles to clean offices where the men inside never remembered her name, was now lying in a hospital bed, exhausted by the very weight of a world that Celeste had spent her life trying to rise above. For a moment, Celeste had nearly canceled everything. She wanted to be there at her mother's side, holding her hand and telling her it would be okay. But then something shifted, an ache turned to iron. Because this fight, this moment, this confrontation, it wasn't separate from her mother's pain. It was connected to it. Celeste's mother had endured a lifetime of being told she was invisible, expected to bow quietly while others looked past her. And earlier that day, Celeste had been told, once again, in public with practiced condescension, that she didn't belong. If she walked away now, if she let that moment sit unanswered, then she wasn't just failing herself. She was failing every woman like her mother who had swallowed her dignity to survive. No, not this time. And so Celeste returned, not as a guest, not as a victim, but as the majority owner of the airline that had once tried to shrink her. As she approached the frosted glass doors, the lounge's sleek branding no longer felt exclusive. It felt hollow. She stepped through. The air inside was cooler, quieter, and carried a tension that wasn't there earlier. Behind the counter, Heather stood laughing with another staff member, sipping from a ceramic mug, her voice lifted in casual amusement. But her laughter died instantly when she looked up and saw Celeste standing there. Celeste didn't say a word at first. She let the silence bloom. The other attendant quickly slipped away, sensing the shift in energy. Heather blinked, recovering her posture with forced professionalism. "Oh, you're back," she said, her voice tight and falsely polite. "Is there something I can help you with?" Celeste didn't move. "Yes," she said simply. "You can call your manager. Now." Heather's expression flickered. Hesitation, confusion, then something colder. "I'm not sure what this is about, ma'am," she began, her tone defensive. But before she could spin a web of pleasantries, the doors behind Celeste slid open, and 2 sharply dressed men entered in lockstep, carrying a slim silver folder and a quiet sense of command. Heather's mouth parted slightly. "Who are—" "They're with me," Celeste said, cutting her off gently but firmly. "This won't take long." One of the men stepped forward and placed the folder on the counter. Celeste opened it calmly, revealing a series of signed documents, each bearing the company's seal. As of 2 hours ago, she said, her voice steady and resonant, I am the majority owner of this airline. Heather's face paled, her lips parted again, but no words came out. The very airline whose lounge you barred me from. Publicly, with disdain, despite me holding a valid ticket, despite me meeting every stated requirement. The silence that followed was so complete that even the hum of the vending machines in the distance sounded loud. Celeste continued, her voice never rising, her poise unwavering. You didn't question my ticket because you had concerns. You questioned it because of how I looked. You asked for ID because you were looking for a reason to deny me. And when you couldn't find one, you made one up. Heather's hands trembled slightly on the counter. I, I didn't mean anything by it, she whispered, her voice cracking. It's protocol sometimes. No, Celeste said quietly. You meant exactly what you did. It wasn't protocol when the white couple walked in without question. It wasn't protocol when the man in shorts was let through. It was me you chose to make an example of. And that choice has consequences. The second man placed a sealed envelope on the desk. Heather recoiled slightly. What is that? She asked, though she already knew. Your termination, Celeste replied, effective immediately. But I've worked here for years, Heather breathed, her voice rising with desperation. I didn't think. Exactly, Celeste said softly. You didn't think. Not about how your actions humiliated someone, not about what your assumptions meant. You just reacted and expected me to take it. The room was still. Staff at the periphery stood frozen, unsure whether to make eye contact or disappear. Celeste inhaled slowly, then exhaled. This isn't about punishing you, Heather. It's about accountability. It's about letting everyone here know that the days of unspoken bias and quiet cruelty are over. We're building something different now, something better. Heather's eyes welled up, but Celeste didn't look away. Her voice softened, but it did not waver. I have a mother in the hospital today, she said quietly, because of a lifetime of stress, of being dismissed, ignored, made to feel less than. And I'll be damned if I stand by and watch that cycle continue in silence. She turned, addressing the room. Let this be clear. This airline is under new leadership, and leadership will not tolerate exclusion, disrespect, or assumption disguised as policy. You treat every passenger with dignity, or you will find the door. As Celeste walked away, the weight in her chest began to lift. Not because it was over, but because justice had finally begun. The air inside the VIP lounge was still trembling in the wake of Heather's removal when Celeste turned to face the staff who remained, some frozen in place behind reception desks, others halfway through folding towels or arranging refreshments, all of them now watching her as if a storm had rolled in and settled right in the middle of their world. But there was no rage in Celeste's eyes, no gloating, only gravity, the kind of heavy, unflinching truth that forced people to sit up straighter and reevaluate everything they thought they knew. She stepped forward, her heels soft against the marble now, like the sound of change arriving in deliberate rhythm. Let's be clear, she began, her voice resonant and even. What happened today wasn't an isolated incident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a mirror, a reflection of a culture that too often rewards assumptions over service, familiarity over fairness, and comfort over accountability. She looked each staff member in the eye, not to intimidate, but to see them. Some couldn't meet her gaze. Others did, eyes wide, brimming with discomfort. If you're standing here wondering whether your job is safe, the answer depends on you, she said, her voice steady but edged with unflinching honesty. Because this company is under new leadership, and that leadership begins and ends with one principle. Every human being deserves to be treated with dignity. No more gatekeeping based on appearance. No more smiles for some and suspicion for others. No more measuring worth by the cut of a suit or the shade of a skin tone. If that makes you nervous, I understand. Change should shake the ground a little. She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle. And then, almost imperceptibly, her expression shifted, her voice softening like dawn, breaking over bruised hills. But I didn't come here to wield power for the sake of it. I came here because I've lived the consequences of a broken system. I've been that little girl watching her mother be spoken to like she was less than nothing at a grocery store. I've been that young professional passed over, ignored, and second-guessed. And yes, I've been the woman with a first-class ticket who was treated like a liar at a desk she had every right to stand at. A flicker of empathy cracked through the room, like light through stained glass. Even the most stoic employees leaned in slightly now, caught in the pull of something deeper than policy. A story, a truth. Celeste walked to the center of the lounge, passing a tray of untouched hors d'oeuvres, a bucket of untouched champagne. This space, she said, gesturing around her, was designed to reflect elegance, comfort, class. But if it doesn't extend that promise to every guest, then it is a lie. And I refuse to run a company built on lies. A younger staff member, Marisol if she remembered correctly, lowered her eyes to the floor, her lips pressed tight. Emily, the receptionist, who had watched the earlier incident unfold in silence, now looked openly shaken. Celeste stopped, turning to them. I know some of you may be afraid you'll be blamed, afraid you'll be next. But that's not what this is about. This isn't about fear. This is about responsibility. She stepped closer to the staff, her voice now like a quiet drumbeat, measured, human, undeniable. You have more power than you think. Every day, you are the first face someone sees when they walk through those doors. You set the tone, you create the memory. You have the power to make someone feel welcome, or to make them carry shame through their entire flight. That power is sacred, and starting today, I expect it to be honored. She reached into her bag and pulled out a slim black binder, simple but crisp. Inside this are the first steps of reform. We're launching immediate mandatory training on unconscious bias, empathy-centered service, and inclusive customer care. Not just a slideshow, real conversations, real work. The staff murmured quietly, exchanging glances. There will also be an anonymous feedback system available to both passengers and staff, Celeste added. If you witness discrimination, report it. If you experience it, speak. Silence is no longer the price of keeping your job. Her words struck home, and she could feel it in the room, the sharp inhale of someone who had once swallowed injustice quietly. The glance from one employee to another that said, I've seen it too. Celeste drew a slow breath, gathering herself. This is not a witch hunt, but this is a reckoning. Because Heather wasn't alone in her behavior, she was just the most obvious. I am not here to fire people to make a point. I am here to build a new foundation, one where nobody gets turned away for looking like me. One where the expectation of professionalism is matched by an expectation of humanity. The silence deepened into something sacred. Outside, a plane lifted from the runway into the setting sun. If you're ready to be part of that, Celeste said, her voice full but resolute, you have nothing to fear. But if you can't align with that vision, this will not be the place for you moving forward. She paused, then softened. And if you're unsure, if you're uncomfortable and uncertain, that's okay. Discomfort means growth is happening. All I ask is that you trim. Slowly, cautiously, Emily stepped forward. I saw what happened, she said, her voice trembling but clear. And I didn't say anything. I was afraid, and I shouldn't have been. I want to do better. Celeste nodded, warmth touching her eyes. That's all I ask. Another voice followed, then another. A ripple of quiet admissions, humbled recognition, hope. Celeste felt her throat tighten, but she stood tall. This wasn't a speech, it was a threshold, and together they were stepping through. We begin again tomorrow, she said. New standards, new training, a new way of doing things. But tonight, look around. Remember how this feels. Because one day soon, this won't feel revolutionary. It'll feel normal, and we'll all be better for it. With that, Celeste turned toward the window, the light painting her in hues of gold and fire. She didn't need applause. The silence was louder. The shift had begun. Later that evening, long after the lounge had emptied of whispers and tension, after the staff had left with a mix of hope and humility in their eyes, Celeste found herself alone again, seated in a quiet corner of the terminal near a wide pane of glass overlooking the glowing tarmac. Outside, the lights on the runway blinked like stars trying to pierce the fog. A distant jet rumbled in for landing, its engines humming like a lullaby from another life. Celeste watched it descend, her reflection merging with the twilight against the glass, and for the first time all day, she let herself be still. Her fingers toyed absent-mindedly with a gold charm on her bracelet, one of the few pieces of jewelry she always wore. A gift from her grandmother, a tiny pair of angel wings, scuffed and aged, but steady, just like her. And in that stillness, Celeste's mind drifted backward, unspooling through years both heavy and beautiful, to the front porch of a narrow house with peeling paint and stubborn flowers, where her story had truly begun. Her grandmother used to sit there in the evenings, a folding fan fluttering in one hand, her voice as weathered as the rocking chair she rarely left. "You listen to me, baby girl," she'd say, her eyes fierce with a kind of pride that didn't need degrees or fancy suits. "The world might try to tell you where you don't belong, but don't let nobody place you. You build your own place. You walk in like it's already yours, and when they try to move you, you plant your feet deeper." Celeste never forgot that. Even as a child, watching planes arc silently overhead in the sticky southern sky, she dreamed of flying, not just in the physical sense, but in the soul sense, of rising, of being seen. But flying had always felt like a world built for someone else. For the families who arrived in taxis with matching luggage and boarding passes clipped to leather wallets. Not for a little black girl in hand-me-down shoes and braids her mama twisted tight on Sunday nights. Her first flight didn't come until college, on a scholarship she'd fought tooth and nail for. She'd worked double shifts tutoring, cleaning, hustling, just to afford the trip to an internship interview that could change her life. She remembered boarding the plane that morning, heart pounding, palms sweating with equal parts excitement and fear. But it wasn't the flight that stuck with her. It was the way the flight attendant's smile faltered when she asked for water. The way the seatmate beside her clutched her purse tighter. The way the businessman 2 rows ahead of her said loudly to no one in particular, "Guess anyone can fly first class these days." She'd smiled politely even then, swallowing her pride like sandpaper, pretending not to hear what she heard, feel what she felt. But deep down it carved something into her, something sharp and enduring. And over the years the cuts kept coming. She earned degrees, she shattered ceilings, but the assumptions never stopped. The confused looks when she walked into boardrooms, the double takes when she presented her ID, the subtle exclusions at conferences, the unspoken questions. "Are you supposed to be here? Did you earn this? Who let you in?" Every slight was a stone, and she carried them all. But instead of letting them weigh her down, she built with them, quietly, carefully. Layer by layer, she constructed a fortress of grace, intellect, and resolve, one they couldn't tear down because they never saw it rising. That's what made it today so personal, so infuriating, so important. Because Heather didn't just deny her access to a lounge. She reopened a wound that had never fully healed. She tried to reduce Celeste to a moment, to a judgment, to a stereotype. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have known, was the lifetime that had led Celeste to that very desk. The nights spent studying until dawn. The boardrooms where her voice was ignored until a man repeated it louder. The tears shed in airport bathrooms after smiling through indignity for the sake of professionalism. The mother who bent her back working through arthritis and grief so her daughters could one day walk through doors she never could. And the grandmother who had long since passed, but whose words still lived inside her like a quiet drumbeat. Build your own place, plant your feet deeper. And now here she was. The little girl on the porch had grown into a woman who didn't just board planes, she bought them. She didn't wait to be invited into the lounge, she owned it. And yet, it wasn't power that moved her now. It wasn't revenge. It was something purer, deeper. The desire to make the world less cruel for the ones who came next. For the next girl who asks for water and gets a grimace instead of a smile. For the next woman who walks into a first-class cabin and is asked if she's lost. For the next daughter whose mother taught her to survive instead of simply live. Celeste wiped a single tear from her cheek, not because she was sad, but because sometimes strength makes space for softness too. She stood slowly, looking out one last time at the glowing runway. Another plane soared upward into the indigo sky, its lights blinking, steady, unwavering. And somewhere in that sky she imagined her grandmother's voice, calm and proud, whispering, "That's my girl." Tomorrow would bring more meetings, policies, reform headlines maybe. But tonight, Celeste allowed herself this moment, not to celebrate what she had gained, but to honor what it had cost. Because leadership wasn't about titles. It was about carrying the weight of the people who made you, about walking into rooms with your ancestors behind you, your community beside you, and the future in your hands. And if you've come this far with her, if you've ever been overlooked, doubted, dismissed, know this. Her story isn't just hers, it's ours, and it's far from over. Celeste Monroe didn't believe in leading from a pedestal. She believed in leading with her feet firmly planted on the same ground as the people who made her airline run. Every gate agent whose smile softened a passenger's bad day, every baggage handler who lifted more weight than the world ever gave them credit for, every janitor who cleaned quietly while the rest of the terminal slept. In the weeks following her public takeover and the firing of Heather, Celeste made a point to show up in the places most executives never visited. She walked the loading docks at 6 a.m. while the sun still yawned over the tarmac. She stood in line at employee cafeterias, striking up conversations with cooks and cashiers. She lingered near break rooms, just listening, not for gossip or praise, but for pain. And she heard it more than once. The quiet sigh of a worker who felt invisible. The strained voice of a mother working overtime to afford her child's asthma medication. The janitor who, with watery eyes, whispered, "I've worked here 22 years, and this is the first time someone in charge asked me my name." It broke something in her, and it built something too. Because Celeste didn't see these people as underlings. She saw them as the foundation. And what kind of leader would she be if she didn't reinforce the very ground beneath her feet? She began keeping a small leather notebook in her blazer pocket. Nothing fancy, just a place to jot down their names, their birthdays, their stories. Jamal from overnight cleaning, whose daughter wanted to be a pilot. Maria at gate B17, who hadn't taken a real vacation in 5 years. Thomas, the technician, who once worked through a panic attack rather than call off, terrified of being labeled unreliable. Their names mattered. Their stories mattered. And if she was going to rebuild this airline's culture from the inside out, it would begin with them. "We've made excellence transactional," she told her leadership team during one of their first full briefings. "We've made people feel like parts instead of humans. I want that to end, now." The room had been quiet, some nodding, some skeptical. One executive, a man with 3 decades in operations, had raised his brow and said, "Celeste, that sounds noble, but empathy doesn't drive margins." She didn't flinch. "Then our margins are built on the wrong things." She wasn't naive. She understood the math, the stockholder meetings, the fiscal bottom lines. But she also understood something far more urgent, that people don't remember which airline had the best leather seats. They remember how they were made to feel. And feelings, she believed, were the most undervalued currency in business. One afternoon, Celeste arrived unannounced at a training session in a cramped corner of Terminal C. The facilitator stammered mid-presentation when she entered, expecting to be scrutinized or corrected. But Celeste didn't come to command. She came to sit. She pulled up a folding chair beside a young trainee named Imani and listened. She nodded. She asked questions. And when the session ended, she waited until everyone else had left before thanking the trainer, with tears glimmering at the corners of her eyes. "I learned more in that hour," she said, "than I have in some boardrooms I've sat in for years." News of that moment spread, not because she wanted it to, but because people talked when they felt seen. Her presence wasn't a publicity stunt. It was a promise. And slowly walls began to fall. Employees began to speak. Changes took root. She instituted mental health resources, created an anonymous platform for staff to report misconduct or raise ideas, and launched a scholarship fund for employees' children. Because dreams, she believed, should fly just as far as planes. But it wasn't always easy. One night, while reviewing anonymous submissions, she found a letter from an employee who had remained silent during a major company event. The message was short, typed in simple language. "I wanted to believe in the new leadership, but my shift manager still treats me like trash when no one's watching. And I can't afford to lose this job, so I just smile and take it. I'm tired of smiling. Please don't let this be performative change." Celeste sat alone in her office after reading it, the clock well past midnight, her coffee cold, her body heavy with the weight of someone else's quiet suffering. She stared out at the dark tarmac, wondering how many others were still smiling through pain, still afraid to be honest, still waiting for someone to truly mean what they said. And in that moment, she knew. Culture didn't shift with statements. It shifted when leaders were willing to sit in discomfort, to confront what was broken, and to feel it. That same week, she had the shift manager investigated, then dismissed. But more than that, she wrote a personal letter to the anonymous employee, delivered confidentially through HR, acknowledging the pain, affirming the promise, and thanking them for their courage. "You are not invisible," she wrote. "Your truth is the root of this change." It was signed in ink, Celeste Monroe, CEO. Not regards, not sincerely, just her name, human to human. Over time, the numbers followed. Turnover dropped. Morale rose. Customers noticed. And while the headlines eventually praised the airline's transformation, Celeste didn't care much for praise. What mattered more were the messages she began to receive from within: quiet emails, folded notes, whispered thanks in corridors. "You changed the air here. You gave me a reason to stay. For the first time in years, I feel like I matter." That was Celeste's bottom line. Not dollars, but dignity. Not slogans, but sincerity. And if you've ever worked a job where no one knew your name, where showing up felt like surviving, not belonging, then you'll understand why this story matters. Celeste didn't just change policies, she changed people. By listening, by caring, by remembering that behind every badge number and title, there's a story worth honoring. And if you're still listening, it means something in you knows. Leadership isn't about being above, it's about standing beside. Celeste Monroe understood something too many in power forget: that culture doesn't change because a memo was sent, or because one person was fired, or because a leader made a speech that earned applause. Real change, lasting, uncomfortable, necessary change, requires systems that outlive any single moment. It has to be written into the bones of the institution, into the policies, the expectations, the consequences. It has to be more than slogans on glossy posters. It must be the architecture behind every decision. And so, in the weeks following her return to the VIP lounge and the swift public termination of Heather, Celeste didn't rest on symbolism. She rolled up her sleeves and began the harder work, laying a new foundation. Her first move was to commission a full audit of the airline's employee training modules, from onboarding videos to customer service scripts to the obscure HR files most executives never bothered to read. What she found confirmed what her instincts already knew. The training was generic, outdated, and worse, insultingly surface level. Bias was treated like a buzzword. Diversity was reduced to photos on recruitment brochures. Accountability was vague and distant, buried beneath chains of command and legal disclaimers. It made her ache because she'd been on the receiving end of that performative culture for years. The "we value everyone" email that came after someone had already been humiliated. The vague promise to look into it. The silent expectation that the person harmed would let it go and move on. But not this time, not under her watch. She formed a dedicated task force, diverse in race, role, and experience, made up not of executives alone, but of gate agents, janitors, call center reps, flight attendants, maintenance workers. She wanted the people who saw the problems firsthand, who lived them, who carried the weight of them every day. "You are the heartbeat of this company," she told them in their first meeting, "and I want your fingerprints on its future." They looked stunned, some skeptical, some teary-eyed, but she meant it. Over the next month, Celeste met with them regularly, her schedule a rotating door of feedback and planning. They spoke openly about the microaggressions, the power dynamics, the tone of voice that changed depending on who walked up to the counter. About how people like Celeste were always asked to explain themselves, to prove they belonged, while others were simply waved through. And in those meetings, something sacred began to take shape. Not just training modules, but truth-telling sessions. Not just reform, but redemption. She commissioned a new training program unlike any the airline had seen before. It wasn't built around checkboxes or corporate platitudes. It was rooted in real stories, narratives of pain, hope, and change. One module opened with the voice of a longtime baggage handler named Clarence, who told the story of the time a passenger dropped a bag at his feet and called him boy. He never reported it. He didn't think anyone would care. I just kept working, his voice cracked in the recording, because I needed the paycheck more than I needed my pride. Another featured a passenger named Malik, who had been questioned by a security agent 3 times on a single trip, not because of a flag on his record, but because his hoodie made him look suspicious. His voice, too, was quiet but resolute. I just wanted to get home to my son, he said. I wasn't trying to make a statement. I was just trying to get through the gate. And finally, the last story was told by a voice familiar to many, Celeste herself, recounting the moment she was turned away from the lounge she now owned. She didn't dramatize it. She simply let the listeners sit with what it felt like to be diminished in public, to have every achievement made invisible by the color of your skin. There was silence after that recording, real silence, the kind that settles into the heart like a stone. But that was the point. She didn't want them to forget how it felt. She wanted them to feel it before they could fix it. Alongside the emotional core of the training, Celeste instituted structural changes with teeth. Every employee, no matter their rank, was required to complete the training annually. Not once, every year. And not just passively. They had to engage, reflect, respond. Managers were required to go through additional leadership modules focused on interrupting bias in real time and creating safe, responsive work environments. Those who refused, removed. No exceptions. You can't manage people you don't respect, she said flatly in the leadership rollout, and you can't respect people you refuse to understand. She also created a new branch within HR, the Office of Equity and Accountability. It functioned independently with a direct line to her office. Anyone, staff or passenger, could submit a report or suggestion, anonymously if needed, and be assured it would be reviewed by a human being, not a robot auto-reply. But perhaps her boldest reform was this. She gave frontline staff more voice in leadership decisions. Each department had rotating floor reps, employees who joined executive meetings monthly to share ground-level insight. It was at first unorthodox. Some execs balked. "Do we really want a food service employee advising on policy?" one said. "Yes," Celeste answered without hesitation, because she knows what's actually happening. One day after a particularly grueling rollout, Celeste sat down at an employee cafe with her tray of food, alone at first, until a young custodian named Denise cautiously approached. "Miss Monroe," she said nervously, "can I sit?" Of course, Celeste smiled. They talked for 15 minutes about Denise's 3 kids, her night shifts, the fact that her oldest son wanted to be a pilot. As Denise stood to leave, she hesitated and said, I never thought people like you would care about people like me." Celeste's throat tightened. "But I am you," she said softly. "That's why this matters." That's why she was doing all of it, not for press or praise, but for people like Denise, for Clarence, for Malik, for every person whose dignity had been delayed, denied, or dismissed. Celeste didn't just want to write a new policy manual. She wanted to write a new story, one where belonging was not a privilege, but a promise. And if you're still listening now, maybe it's because you too know how much that promise is worth. Maybe you've waited your whole life for someone in power to look down and say, "I see you, I hear you, and I'm building this for you." Celeste Monroe did, and she's just getting started. Weeks passed, and the changes Celeste Monroe had implemented began to pulse through the veins of the airline like new oxygen, subtle at first, then unmistakable. Where once there had been caution in the hallways and hesitation in morning meetings, there was now a fragile but growing sense of trust. You could feel it in the way employees lingered a little longer at the start of their shifts, checking in with one another instead of simply clocking in. You could hear it in the laughter returning to break rooms that had long gone quiet. And perhaps most moving of all, you could see it in the transformation of Emily. Once the nervous receptionist who had stood frozen the day Heather denied Celeste access to the lounge, now standing tall behind the same counter with quiet confidence in her eyes and a small leadership pin on her blazer. Celeste had noticed her immediately after the incident, not just because she'd stood still, but because her silence had not come from malice. It came from fear, a fear Celeste knew all too well. Emily had reminded her of herself decades ago, before the boardrooms and the power and the calm that only experience could shape. Celeste saw the tension in Emily's shoulders, the guilt she tried to hide behind polite smiles. And instead of dismissing her, she invested in her. She invited Emily into training discussions. She gave her small responsibilities, managing scheduling, coordinating feedback from passengers, mentoring newer hires. Emily rose, not with arrogance, but with humility, determination, and grace. One day, while helping a lost elderly couple who had wandered into the lounge by mistake, Emily crouched beside them, offering water in a soft voice as she explained where they needed to go. Celeste had watched from a distance as the woman grasped Emily's hand and whispered, "You remind me of my daughter." That moment became a mirror for everyone who once doubted her, and within 6 months, Emily was promoted to lounge supervisor. But redemption didn't stop with Emily. It surprised Celeste most when it came in the form of a message, written in hesitant, uneven strokes on an airline-issued note card. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope there's still room for growth. I'm not the person I was that day. If you're willing, I'd like to talk. Heather." Celeste read the note twice, her expression unreadable, before setting it down on her desk and staring out the window. The sky was overcast that day, the kind of gray that dulled even the sound of planes taking off. Part of her wanted to crumple the card and move on, but a deeper part, the part that had fought so long to believe in second chances, leaned into the discomfort. She remembered what she'd said to her team weeks earlier. This isn't about punishment, it's about accountability and growth. And so, she scheduled the meeting. Heather arrived early, dressed in civilian clothes, her makeup minimal, her posture unsure. She looked around the conference room like someone bracing for impact. "Thank you for seeing me," she said, voice low. Celeste didn't offer false warmth. She gestured to the seat across from her. "Why now?" she asked. Heather took a deep breath. "Because I've been ashamed since the moment it happened," she said. "At first I was angry. I told myself I was being treated unfairly. But the truth is, you forced me to see things I didn't want to see, about myself." She fumbled in her purse and pulled out a slim, worn journal. "I've been writing, trying to unpack how many times I've acted out of fear, or superiority, or habit. I see now that what I did to you wasn't just one moment. It was a pattern I had stopped questioning." Celeste listened silently, watching the woman in front of her unravel the mask of practiced politeness she'd once worn so well. Heather looked up, eyes glossy. "I'm not asking for a job. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry and thank you. You changed something in me that day." Celeste folded her hands, letting the silence hold them both for a moment. "Apology acknowledged." She said, "I acknowledge," she said finally. "And growth, if sincere, is always welcome. But understand, Heather, forgiveness isn't the same as erasure. What happened mattered. It hurt. And I carry that. But I also carry hope. For you, for this place, for the people we serve." Heather nodded, shoulders trembling under the weight of what she had been carrying. "I understand." Before she left, she turned one last time. "If there's ever a way I can give back, I'm ready." The door closed quietly behind her, and Celeste sat back, allowing herself a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. It was a breath not of peace, but of possibility. Not every story of growth ended in promotion. Some ended in parting. But others, like Emily's, blossomed into new beginnings. And still others, like Heather's, remained open-ended, tender in their uncertainty. Celeste saw more of them unfold. She watched Marcus, a flight attendant who'd once scoffed at the new training as political overkill, sit with tears streaming down his face after hearing a colleague's story of being targeted by a passenger. He stood afterward and apologized, not for disagreeing, but for never having tried to understand. "I thought this was about compliance," he said, "but it's about compassion." And there was Renee, a senior staffer who had once dismissed Celeste's reforms behind closed doors, now volunteering to lead one of the first internal peer review panels for bias complaints. "I can't fix the mistakes I didn't see," she said in front of her peers, "but I can help make sure no one else feels alone like that again." These weren't just procedural shifts. These were human transformations, each one small, quiet, and hard-earned. Celeste knew the airline's heart wasn't healed in a day, but healing had begun. And for a woman who had been denied her place in a lounge built to exclude her, that meant everything. She had turned indignity into invitation. She had turned silence into dialogue. She had turned one moment of exclusion into a movement of inclusion. And if you're still listening now, if you've ever wondered whether people can really change or whether institutions can learn to reflect the people they serve, Celeste Monroe is proof that the answer is yes. Yes, with accountability. Yes, with humility. Yes, with leadership that sees people, not just positions. The road ahead was still long, but it was no longer lonely. Redemption, Celeste had learned, was not about erasing the past. It was about choosing to grow beyond it, together. By the end of that first transformative year, Celeste Monroe no longer needed to announce change. It was happening all around her. It was written in this way passengers smiled more often as they passed through the terminals, in the way employees stood a little taller behind the counters, in the way conflict resolution forms began to be replaced with thank you notes and glowing reviews. It lived in the silence, the absence of shame-laced incidents, the fall in whispered complaints, the fading sting of questions like, "Are you sure you belong here?" Celeste walked through the terminals quietly now, no entourage, no performance. She didn't need to command attention. Respect bloomed in her wake like wildflowers growing from the cracks of what had once been a cold concrete culture. One afternoon, while boarding a routine flight, she overheard a gate agent gently correct a security officer who had questioned a young black teen traveling alone. "He's a priority passenger," the agent said, stepping forward with calm authority. "And we treat every priority passenger the same, regardless of how young or black they are." The boy blinked, stunned, unsure how to respond. Celeste didn't interrupt. She watched quietly, her heart folding in on itself. The boy gave a small nod of thanks before disappearing down the jet bridge, still clutching the corner of his jacket like a shield. And in that moment, she saw herself again. Every version of herself who had once just hoped to get through a flight without shrinking. The structural changes she had sown were no longer just policy. They were culture. Her Office of Equity and Accountability had logged over 1,000 cases in 10 months, 72% of which were resolved with formal correction or internal reform. Not buried, not forgotten, resolved. More than 150 employees had been trained to serve as peer advocates, support figures within the system for colleagues unsure how to speak up alone. They wore subtle pins, small circles in the shape of open doors, and staff began to recognize them not with fear, but with relief. Passenger satisfaction scores soared, but the wins that mattered most weren't measured in metrics. They were human. Like the story of Mr. Atwood, an elderly Korean War veteran who hadn't flown in 2 decades and approached the lounge with shaking hands and a paper ticket. Emily, now a seasoned supervisor, met him at the door. She didn't ask him to repeat himself. She didn't look past him. She stepped forward, smiled, and said, "Welcome back, sir. We're honored to have you." She sat with him for 15 minutes while he waited for his flight, telling him about the new art program they'd installed and asking about the medals on his coat. After his flight, he left a handwritten letter at the front desk. It ended with one line that made its way through the airline's leadership team like a spark. "Today, I remembered what dignity feels like." There were other moments too, like the day a transgender passenger was misgendered by a staffer at check-in. In the past, it would have ended with a shrug, or worse, blame pushed onto the passenger. But this time, the staffer immediately apologized, escorted the passenger to a nearby office, and called a manager, not to defend himself, but to explain what happened and ask for help getting it right next time. Later, the passenger wrote, "I wasn't made to feel like a problem. I was made to feel like a person." For once, well, that was the shift Celeste had dreamed of. And still, there were those who resisted. A regional manager had submitted his resignation rather than complete the second round of bias training, calling it too emotional and not relevant to the bottom line. Celeste didn't fight him. She accepted the resignation with a calm nod and a simple phrase: "This airline is not for everyone. It's for everyone who believes in everyone." That story spread through staff rooms like a quiet anthem. She meant what she said, and more importantly, she meant to protect what she was building. Celeste's calendar remained full: meetings, audits, leadership strategy, but she never let that keep her from the ground. Once a month, she still visited terminals without notice, speaking with employees at random, always asking the same question: How are you? And how can we do better? It wasn't grand, but it mattered. One December morning, she returned to the very lounge where the humiliation had once begun. This time, not for confrontation, but for connection. She entered quietly, wearing simple clothes blending in. A young girl sat in the corner with her mother, dressed in an oversized hoodie, a little out of place amid the blazers and briefcases. The girl whispered something to her mother, who shook her head. Celeste approached with a smile. "Everything okay?" The mother hesitated. "My daughter wants to be a pilot," she said, glancing down. "She just doesn't think it's possible." Celeste crouched slightly, lowering herself to the child's eye level. "I once thought that too," she said gently. "Now I run the company." The child's eyes widened. Her mother gasped. Celeste winked. "Dreams don't ask for permission, and they don't need to look a certain way. You fly anyway." That child's letter arrived a month later in Celeste's office, written in purple crayon. "Thank you for seeing me. I'm going to be brave now." That one, Celeste framed. She placed it beside the charter documents of the airline, the official papers marking her ownership. Not because they held the same weight, but because the letter represented the very reason she had fought so hard to change this place, so the next generation wouldn't have to fight the same battles just to belong. The airline thrived, profits increased, retention rose. But Celeste knew numbers would never tell the whole story. The real story was told in quiet glances, brave conversations, and the small, steady hum of dignity restored. And if you've stayed with her story this long, it's because you know what it feels like to be overlooked, and what it means when someone finally looks you in the eye and says, "You matter." This was no longer just Celeste Monroe's airline. It belonged to everyone who had ever been made to feel small and finally had a place to rise. The ballroom was filled with the soft clinking of glasses, the low hum of conversation, and the occasional burst of laughter from pockets of employees who not long ago might never have imagined standing shoulder to shoulder with executives in a room lined with gold-trimmed banners reading, "One year, one vision, one future." At the front of the room, framed by warm lights and backed by the airline's crest, stood Celeste Monroe, poised, graceful, and deeply human as she prepared to deliver the speech that would mark the one-year anniversary of the airline's transformation. She took a slow breath and looked out at the sea of faces: gate agents in smart Navy uniforms, maintenance workers still in reflective vests, flight attendants who had landed just hours before, senior leaders who had once hesitated and now stood proudly beside her. The diversity of the room mirrored the soul of the airline she had rebuilt, not from strategy alone, but from empathy, courage, and the radical belief that dignity was not optional. "When I stood here a year ago," she began, her voice clear and warm, "I was the owner of an airline, but I was also someone who had just been told, in public and with certainty, that I didn't belong." A murmur of recognition rippled through the crowd. Some had been there. Others had heard the story countless times. "That moment," she continued, "wasn't just about me. It was a mirror, a reflection of what too many people experience, not just in travel, but in life. Being underestimated, being dismissed, being told to wait your turn while others are welcomed through doors you helped build." Her gaze swept across the room. But from that moment came something else, a fire, a choice, a vision not to shame or punish, but to change. From the inside out, there was silence, reverent, powerful. "And today," she smiled, her voice catching slightly, "we're standing in that vision together." Applause rose, soft at first, then louder, swelling with emotion. Celeste paused, letting it rise, then gently motioned for quiet. "This success doesn't belong to me," she said. "It belongs to every person in this room who decided to be better instead of bitter, who admitted they had something to learn, who reached across divides and chose humanity over hierarchy." She reached into her pocket and held up the same leather-bound notebook she had carried on her first walk through the terminal. "This," she said, "is filled with your names, your stories, your struggles, and triumphs. Every change we made was because of you, and every life we touched, every passenger who walked away feeling seen and respected, that was because of what you decided to build." The applause came again, but softer this time, more personal. Celeste's eyes glistened as she continued, "But this isn't just about what we've done, it's about what we carry forward. Because every space we walk into is an opportunity to welcome or to wound, to see or to dismiss, to build or to break. Her voice softened. I want you to remember this. The next time someone walks into your presence and they seem nervous or unsure, remind yourself they might be walking into a world that hasn't always welcomed them. Be the one who makes them feel safe, because that feeling, that's what real leadership is. The ballroom was silent now, as if the walls themselves were listening. Celeste nodded, then added, and to everyone watching from afar, to the passengers who told their stories, to the people who believed this couldn't happen, thank you. Your voices matter. They always have. She closed her notebook, smiled, and looked around the room one final time. I leave you with this. What began with exclusion became a movement of transformation. One person's dismissal became a company's awakening, and what was once a moment of humiliation became a legacy of hope. As the room rose to a standing ovation, Celeste stepped back, her heart full. She had walked into a place that tried to deny her, and she hadn't just stayed, she had changed it. That was her happy ending, not power for power's sake, but power used to open doors and hold them open for others. And for you, listening now, maybe there's something you're carrying too, a moment you've been dismissed, a time you were overlooked, a memory that still stings because someone didn't see your worth. Let Celeste's story remind you that pain is real, but it doesn't get to define you. You do, with every quiet act of courage, every time you choose compassion, every time you plant your feet in a room that wasn't built for you and say, I belong here. So take this story and carry it with you. Let it speak to your own journey. Let it remind you that it's not naive to believe the world can change. It's necessary. And if you lead like Celeste, with empathy, vision, and unshakable grace. If this story touched you, please show your support by clicking the like button. Every like helps bring Celeste's message of dignity and transformation to more people. Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Was there a moment in her story that reminded you of your own? We'd love to hear from you. And if you want to hear more stories like this, of quiet strength, of justice, of everyday people rising and leading lasting change, hit that subscribe button. This channel is here to remind you, the world doesn't just need louder voices, it needs braver ones. And it starts with you. Thank you for watching. And until the next story, keep rising and keep building.